Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. This time, we're going to be tackling something a little bit unsettling, even.
Yeah.
Implicit bias,
Yeah.
those sneaky, unconscious attitudes and stereotypes
Yeah.
that can influence our actions and decisions in all kinds of crazy ways. We're
Yeah.
talking everything from classrooms and courtrooms
Mm-hmm.
to even emergency rooms and hiring committees.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the sources you've provided this time, oh my goodness. Research studies, real-world examples, it's incredible.
It's pretty fascinating stuff, yeah.
I'm excited.
It's this whole idea that we've got this hidden layer of bias, right?
Right.
Operating beneath the surface of our awareness.
Right.
And it's not about intentional prejudice, you know? It's
Right,
not like
right.
people are consciously trying to discriminate. It's these automatic associations
Right.
that we form over time, often based on, cultural messages and societal norms and things like that.
It's like having hidden autopilot. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
They can steer us in the wrong direction even when we think we're fully in control.
Absolutely.
So how do we even know these biases exist if they're so hidden?
Yeah. Well, the research has gotten really good at finding ways to measure these implicit biases.
Okay.
One of the ways is this thing called the implicit association test, right?
The IAT, yeah, your sources mentioned that.
The IAT, exactly.
Right.
And basically, this tool, it measures the strength of associations between concepts in our minds.
Okay.
So, like, for example, do we more quickly associate the word science with a male face or a female face?
I see.
And the speed of our responses, that can actually reveal these implicit biases.
Wow.
Even if we'd never admit to them out loud, right?
It's like a mental race almost.
Yeah, exactly. It's like a competition.
Yeah, to see which association comes out on top.
To see which one wins.
That's so clever.
Yeah, and it turns out, this testing has uncovered some pretty interesting findings.
Yeah, what kinds of things have they found?
Well, one of your sources dives into this, and it's really eye-opening. It turns out we often hold implicit biases that associate certain races, genders, or social groups with very specific traits or abilities, right?
Okay.
Even if we consciously disagree with those stereotypes.
Right, so it's not even like we believe these things.
Right, exactly.
But somehow they're still...
But they're still there.
Or there.
Lurking in the background.
Yeah, and this isn't just theoretical, is it?
No, not at all.
These biases can have...
real-world consequences.
Yeah, big time, especially when you look at things like healthcare or hiring decisions.
Absolutely. One of your sources even includes this really compelling case study from the healthcare field. It's about an African-American man who went to the ER with serious health concerns.
Yeah.
But his entire experience was really affected by what appears to be implicit bias on the part of the medical staff.
This is the one where he's waiting for hours.
Yes.
Even though his symptoms are really severe. And it's like the nurse is dismissive of his pain. It was honestly heartbreaking to read.
It is. It's a tough one. And, we can't know for sure what was going on in that nurse's mind.
Right.
But it really highlights how these subtle biases can show up, even in these seemingly benign interactions.
It makes you wonder, though, right?
Yeah.
Like, how much did implicit bias influence the care he received?
Huge question. And, the potential consequences of that are really significant.
Because in a situation like that, even a slight delay in treatment could make a huge difference.
Absolutely.
For his health. I mean, I can't even imagine going through that. Like having people dismiss your pain, that would not exactly inspire trust in the healthcare system.
No, not at all. And that distrust can actually lead to people avoiding medical care altogether.
Oh, wow.
Which obviously has these detrimental effects on their health outcomes.
Makes sense.
So, yeah, there's actually a growing body of research exploring this link between implicit bias in healthcare and racial disparities in health outcomes.
It's a sobering thought.
Yeah.
But it's so important to grapple with this.
Absolutely.
Because if we want to fix these disparities, we need to understand how these unconscious biases are contributing to the problem.
100%. And it's not just healthcare either.
Oh, right. Your sources talk about hiring too?
Yeah, hiring decisions.
Yeah.
Especially in fields where certain groups have just historically been underrepresented.
Like there was that study you mentioned.
Yes.
With the scientific committees.
Yeah. Yeah, they found that these committees showed implicit gender biases.
Right. But only when...
But here's the thing.
Yeah.
Only when those committees didn't believe that gender bias was a problem in their field.
It's kind of mind-boggling, isn't it?
It is, right. It suggests that when we're convinced that a particular type of bias doesn't exist, We just don't really critically evaluate our own judgments.
So it's almost like our belief that we're unbiased
Uh-huh.
makes us more susceptible to implicit bias.
Exactly. Like we let our guard down.
Wow.
And that's why, it's so important to just acknowledge this
Yeah.
pervasive nature of implicit bias. I mean, even those of us who are like really committed
Right.
to fairness and equality, we can still fall prey to this stuff.
It's almost like we have to constantly be on guard,
Yeah.
questioning our own assumptions and motivations just to make sure those biases aren't affecting our decisions.
It's a process.
Yeah.
It's ongoing awareness, self-reflection.
But the good news is there's research being done to try to mitigate these effects, right?
Absolutely.
Like to help us become more conscious.
Yeah, more intentional in our actions.
That's good to hear because, wow, if we're all walking around with these hidden biases,
Right.
it seems crucial that we find ways to counteract them. To make sure we're treating each other fairly and equitably.
Yeah, I mean, that's where the research is headed now. It's not just about identifying these biases, but about developing practical strategies, right?
Yeah.
To help people recognize them and then mitigate their impact.
In real-world settings.
Exactly.
Okay, so what does that look like?
Yeah.
Are there things we can actually do to override these automatic biased responses?
There are, and your sources actually highlight some really fascinating research.
Okay, now this is where I'm intrigued.
Yeah.
We know these biases exist, and we know they can be harmful, but
Right.
what can we actually do about it?
Ah.
I'm really curious to see what the research suggests.
Well, one of your sources suggests that simply acknowledging that implicit bias exists, that's a huge first step.
Okay.
It's about kind of bringing these hidden associations into our conscious awareness so we can actually start to question them, challenge their influence.
So it's like shining a light on those mental shortcuts.
Exactly.
Those automatic responses that we don't even realize are guiding our perceptions and judgments. But awareness alone doesn't solve the problem, does it?
No, it's just the beginning.
So what are some of the more practical strategies for actually changing those biased responses?
Well, one promising avenue is education.
Okay.
One of your sources highlighted this really interesting study where they used a specific teaching activity to expose students to this whole concept of implicit bias.
Yeah. I remember this one. They were discussing a controversial topic, right?
Yeah.
And then evaluating arguments made by different characters.
Exactly.
And that's where things got interesting.
Yeah, they started making all these assumptions about the characters' motives.
Right.
Based on their perceived group membership,
Like assuming someone's argument was biased.
Exactly.
Just because of their race or gender.
Right.
Without even considering the argument itself.
Totally.
So it's like a wake-up call.
Yeah.
To help them recognize those knee-jerk reactions.
Right.
That can lead to unfair or unfounded judgments.
Exactly. And by making those biases explicit, it kind of creates this opportunity, right?
Yeah.
For self-reflection and critical thinking.
So it's not about denying we have biases, but developing the awareness and the skills to override them.
Exactly. Exactly. It's about learning to pause, right? Question those initial assumptions.
Right.
Consider alternative perspectives.
Before making a judgment or taking action.
Absolutely.
This makes a lot of sense. And actually, your healthcare source offers some concrete examples of how this can be done in real-world settings.
Oh, are you thinking about the hospital that implemented mandatory cultural competency training?
That's the one.
Yeah, yeah.
It seems so simple.
It does.
But it can make a huge difference, right?
It's a huge difference.
In helping healthcare providers develop the awareness and skills they need to engage with patients from diverse backgrounds.
In a sensitive and equitable way.
Yeah.
Exactly. And it's not just about understanding different cultures, but it's also about developing that self-awareness to recognize your own biases and to actively work to counteract them.
In those patient interactions.
Absolutely.
So it's about moving beyond that general awareness and developing specific strategies, right? For navigating those situations where implicit bias might be influencing our perceptions or actions.
100%. And your source also mentions that this hospital really emphasized data collection and analysis, to track patient experiences and outcomes.
That's smart.
So they could identify any potential disparities and address them proactively.
It's about moving beyond good intentions, right?
Absolutely.
And actually measuring the impact
Yeah.
to make sure it's making a difference.
It's about holding ourselves accountable,
Yeah.
both individually and as institutions,
Right.
for creating more equitable and inclusive environments.
And this commitment to ongoing evaluation and improvement, that's key.
It is, because the research on implicit bias, it's constantly evolving, right?
Yeah.
So we have to be open to new findings, new approaches.
You know, it's interesting. You mentioned earlier how early research really focused on the biases of dominant groups.
Yeah.
But now there's this growing recognition of the need
Absolutely.
to explore minority group experiences as well. Yeah. And to acknowledge that everyone has biases.
Everyone, exactly.
Not just those in positions of power.
It's a human thing.
It is.
And the research is really starting to explore that more.
That's good.
Yeah, we need more research on interventions and strategies.
For addressing implicit bias in all these different settings.
Yeah, schools, workplaces, healthcare systems.
It's not just about identifying them anymore.
Right.
It's figuring out what works to mitigate those harmful effects.
Exactly.
It's such a fascinating area of research.
It is.
And one thing that really struck me
is
just how complex and multifaceted this whole thing is.
It's true. It's not a simple issue.
No.
You know, there's not some easy fix.
Right.
One of your sources even talked about an alternative measure of implicit bias.
Oh, right. Not just the IAT, but
the Go association task.
the GNAD, exactly.
And this one, instead of looking at reaction times, it focuses on someone's ability to accurately categorize concepts and avoid making mistakes based on their implicit biases.
Exactly. So it's tapping into a slightly different aspect of it.
Are there situations where one measure might be more effective?
That's a great question.
Or insightful than the other?
Yeah, I mean, they both offer valuable insights.
Okay.
But the IAT is great at capturing those automatic associations. Whereas the GNAT, you know, it might be more sensitive to someone's conscious effort to control their biased responses.
I see.
So researchers are still kind of teasing all that apart.
Yeah, it seems like the more we learn about implicit bias, the more we realize how much we still don't know.
Absolutely.
And your sources also talk about how people react to their own scores.
Yeah.
On the IAT, right? Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it?
It is. It's like not everyone is willing to accept that they might have these implicit biases.
It can be challenging to confront those parts of ourselves.
Especially when they contradict our self-image.
Right.
As fair and unbiased people. So how do people typically react when faced with this kind of information?
Well, the research suggests there's a range of responses. Some people, you know, even those who score as having implicit bias, let's say racial bias, they're very resistant to interpreting their score as like actually reflecting their beliefs.
So it's almost like their conscious minds are trying to protect their self-image.
Yeah, they're rationalizing away the results.
Right. We have this built-in defense mechanism that kicks in when we feel threatened by this kind of information.
It makes sense.
Makes sense.
And the research even suggests that people who are prone to feeling guilty about their biases, they're more likely to acknowledge the results of the IAT.
So if you're already sensitive to the idea of having biases, you might be more willing to accept that evidence.
Exact.
That confirms those suspicions.
Absolutely.
But if you see yourself as this completely unbiased person, you're more likely to resist that information.
Right, because it challenges that self-perception.
Yeah.
And this highlights the role of self-awareness and emotional regulation in how we respond to information about our biases.
So it's not just about understanding the concept. It's also about developing the emotional maturity to confront those uncomfortable truths.
Yes, exactly.
It's a journey of self-discovery, isn't it?
It is.
Learning to see ourselves more clearly with all our complexities and contradictions.
Absolutely.
And this self-awareness is crucial.
It is.
For being able to make real, lasting change.
I agree.
In our attitudes and behaviors.
Yeah, it's about moving beyond that denial and defensiveness. To a place of genuine curiosity and a willingness to learn and grow.
It's so true. The more we explore this, the more we uncover these fascinating connections between our conscious and unconscious minds, our emotions, our behavior.
It's amazing. It seems like your sources suggest that some biases are more easily recognized than others.
Oh, interesting. Like what?
Well, there's this one study that found that people are more likely to perceive their slow responses on the IAT as race-related, right? If the test involves associating Black names with unpleasant words.
Okay.
Compared to associating Black names with, let's say, female names.
That's interesting. So the context of the association really matters.
It does.
It's not just the groups involved,
right,
but the specific stereotypes or social categories that are being activated in the test.
Absolutely. It seems like some biases are just more deeply ingrained, more readily activated, and therefore harder to ignore or rationalize away.
Okay, so what does all this research tell us about the nature of prejudice?
Well, it's definitely shifted our understanding.
In what way?
It's not just about conscious hatred or discrimination anymore.
Okay.
It's about these subtle, unconscious associations that can influence our judgments and actions.
Even when we're not aware of it.
Exactly.
A humbling realization.
It is.
To acknowledge that even if we consciously reject prejudice, we might still be influenced by these implicit biases.
Especially in situations where we're under pressure or tired.
Right, or just not paying close attention.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to understand the potential impact.
Not just in extreme cases, but in our everyday interactions.
Absolutely.
Because these biases can affect our decisions in subtle but significant ways.
Yeah, and potentially lead to all sorts of disparities.
In education, healthcare.
Yeah.
It's a call to action.
It is.
We need to be vigilant, question our own assumptions, and work to mitigate these effects of implicit bias.
In our own lives and in the systems around us.
It's a big task.
It is.
But it's important.
It is. And your sources point to the importance of education.
Right.
Self-reflection, developing strategies to counteract those automatic responses.
It's an ongoing journey, isn't it?
Yeah.
Continually uncovering those hidden assumptions.
And challenging their influence.
On our thoughts and actions.
Exactly. And one of your sources focused on these gender stereotypes about math and language abilities, highlighted how these biases can develop early.
Oh, right. They were looking at implicit and explicit stereotypes in kids between 8 and 15.
That's right.
And did they find that girls fall prey to those math is for boys stereotypes?
Well, actually, their findings were pretty surprising.
Oh, really?
Yeah, girls across all age groups showed a clear preference for their own gender.
Okay.
In both math and D language.
Interesting.
Both implicitly and explicitly.
So the girls in the study weren't buying into that whole boys are better at math thing.
Not at all. And remember, they measured both implicit biases using a method called the AMP, and explicit beliefs through just direct questions. And the results were pretty consistent.
Yeah.
Girls consistently favored their own gender, no matter their age.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
So if the girls aren't internalizing those negative stereotypes about math, what's driving these in-group preferences?
Well, the researchers suggest it might have something to do with their actual academic performance. Girls tend to outperform boys in school.
That's true.
And so this awareness of their own success could be shaping their beliefs.
Interesting.
About gender and academic ability.
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
It suggests that our experiences in the real world, especially those that challenge those prevailing stereotypes, can really impact our implicit biases.
Absolutely.
So positive role models, real-world evidence that can actually help reshape those unconscious associations.
Yeah, and this study also found that boys, while not showing any strong implicit biases, they tended to explicitly favor girls in both math and language, especially in middle and high school.
Oh, wow. So that kind of plays into that whole school is feminine idea, right?
Exactly.
Right.
If boys are seeing girls consistently excelling in academic settings, they might start to associate academic achievement with femininity.
Which could then lead to some real-world consequences, right?
Absolutely. Some experts even argue that if boys view academic achievement as incompatible with masculinity, they might be less motivated to strive for success in those domains,
Yeah.
Which could contribute to those gender gaps we see in certain fields.
It's a self-fulfilling prophecy almost.
It is, right.
If you believe that something isn't for you, you're less likely to even try.
Exactly. And that brings us back to the importance of awareness, If we can understand how these implicit biases shaped by cultural messages, our experiences can influence our perceptions and behaviors, then we can start to break free from those limiting beliefs.
So it's not just about unlearning those negative stereotypes, but it's also about recognizing how they might be influencing our choices, our aspirations, even our sense of self.
Exactly. You've got it. And that's the power of this whole deep dive, right? He's given us this chance to explore these hidden forces that shape our perceptions and actions.
And hopefully empower us to make more conscious choices.
Or informed choices.
More equitable choices.
Absolutely.
I think our listeners feeling that too.
I hope so.
So as we wrap up, what's the one key takeaway you hope they'll walk away with?
I think the biggest takeaway is this. Implicit bias is real, and it affects all of us. But it's not an excuse. It's a call to action.
I love that.
By understanding these biases, we can challenge their influence and create a more just and equitable world.
So well said. It's been a fascinating exploration, and I have a feeling our listeners are going to be pondering these ideas for a while.
I hope so.
Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
See you later.